Have you ever wanted to ask a question but were afraid of being labeled as naive or insensitive or racist or even just stupid? Well, we've all had that moment, but it is now more important than ever for us to understand our differences, even if we are afraid to ask.
So this next segment, Asking for a Friend, will help us better verbalize and contextualize race-related topics. So here to talk us through your submitted questions, as well as our own questions, is Danielle Cadet, VP and Managing Editor at Refinery 29's Unbothered. Danielle, great to have you with us here today. Really quickly, before we get into the questions that were submitted, we want to ask, why is it more important now than ever to ask these uncomfortable questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all about dialogue right now. I think we are looking to move forward and we're looking to make progress. And I don't think it helps anyone to feel like we can't have conversation, because what will then end up happening is people will continue to misunderstand each other and we won't actually be making any progress forward. We'll just kind of be staying in silos with people who we feel comfortable with. And right now, the point is to be uncomfortable in order for us to unlearn some things that are really going to move us forward in this conversation.
All right, Danielle, so let's get uncomfortable. This first question reached peak popularity in the weeks following the death of George Floyd on Google search trends. So first question is, what is the difference between calling someone black versus African American?
So, I think people are very uncomfortable with saying the word black, and the reality is they shouldn't be. Black is more representative of the full African diaspora. What we do when we refer to somebody as African American is we're only acknowledging a very small part of the diaspora. Black people, African people, and African enslaved people were brought across the world. Myself, I am first generation Haitian American. And so I don't actually consider myself African American. I don't refer to myself as African American. I refer to myself as Black. We do this very often when we're talking about Black people from the UK or Black people from Canada. The reality is that those people are not African American. And so in order to be more representative of the full diaspora of enslaved African folks who were brought across the world, it is okay to just say Black. You're not disrespecting anybody by saying that, and personally for me, it's a preference. So the major difference is that when you're speaking about somebody that's African American, you're speaking about somebody who's specifically from the American diaspora versus someone who's from a different part of the world.
And so next up here, what is the right time to use words like black versus person of color versus minority versus BIPOC? That one's new for a lot of people too.
Yeah. The BIPOC is tripping a lot of people up there. I always say that it's best to be specific. We kind of live in a society where we like to kind of think of these catch-all phrases, and certainly like person of color and BIPOC fall in that category. But I think it's always best practice to be specific. If you are referring to an indigenous person, say that. If you are referring to a Latinx person, say that. If you are referring to a Black person, say that. Because you never want to disrespect or offend a group of people by using a catch-all phrase that might not be representative of their experience. So I think it's really best for us as we move forward with these conversations to be really specific about who we're speaking to and who we're targeting. And so I think it's always best to be specific as possible. I know that we kind of think of these catch-all phrases as we're having this large conversation, but I think it's really important to be super pointed about who we're referring to.
Okay, now let's go deep on this one, because we need to know, what is the difference between being non-racist and being an anti-racist? This is one of the questions that we got in.
This is a really, really important one. Being an anti-racist is really about actively working against the function of white supremacy and racism. It is not enough to be, and we've heard this a lot right now, particularly in this time, it's not enough to be non-racist. Non-racist really functions on an individual level. It's really kind of like a me, myself, and I. I don't personally have those ideas. But the key here is action. And action is the key difference between being non-racist and anti-racist. And it's great for people to be non-racist, and it's great for people to say that I am not a racist, but it's more impactful and productive to actively fight against racism. So in order to combat the societal structures in our society that enable white supremacy and disenfranchise Black people and disenfranchise people of color, indigenous people, Latinx people, you have to be anti-racist. You have to put action behind working against the structures of white supremacy.
Danielle, very, very good advice here. We do have to leave it there. We're going to have you back to answer more questions because we've gotten a lot of great advice here, Danielle. Thank you so much for your time. That's Danielle Cadet, VP and Managing Editor at Refinery 29's Unbothered. Thanks again.